with us Mr. Riyaz Tayyibji. He is the principal architect and partner at Anthill Design, Ahmedabad. Anthill Design is an architectural design firm based in Ahmedabad. It has built across India in a large variety of places with different character, culture and landscape. It is deeply involved in the design of buildings that belong to the place where they are built and emerge from the specific patterns of how they are to be used. Riyaz has been instrumental in rooting the firm's practice in the documentation and research of architecture and urbanity. He is also a current conducting bridge studio faculty for the 5th year. I now invite Mr. Riyaz Tayyibji for the presentation. Welcome to KRVIA.
From guys I know very well. Thank you so much for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been having problems this whole time with formats. You know, it's really funny. I was telling Pinkish that the day after you jhap your class for late submission, that's the day that your file decides to take revenge of you. Anyway, so what I would like to talk to you guys about is a little bit about what we do in our office and the kind of engagements we have. A little bit of a background that I graduated from the School of Architecture, CEPT Ahmedabad, before it was a university. About the time that we graduated in the late 90s, there was a shift happening that one could not have known at that time. It was common at CEPT to take 5, 7, maybe 10 years to do your thesis. It wasn't unheard of to take 17. And there was no hurry to get out in the profession like you have today, where there's work, things happen at a particular speed, and that's part of the urgency of getting out and doing things. It was a much more relaxed kind of socialist time in which we were emerging into the profession. And I remember thinking that, I'm going to join an office apprentice till I'm about 45. I had these numbers in my head. I joined Ranjit and Vandana's office here for a few years and then went back to work on earthquake housing post the Gujarat earthquake in Bhuj and worked in Saurashtra. And we started our practice quite by accident by winning a competition, which I will not be showing you today. We were thrown into the practice by chance, so I had no intention of being in practice that early. I was of that opinion that you hone your skill, you learn the craft, and you get into the profession and you get proficient at it. So I thought I would be starting practice at about where I am right now. But that's not how it turned out. And one of the things that we've done as a practice is simply taken it as it comes. For the first 5 or 7 years, I worked with people whom I didn't know. My partners for that competition were Sarosh Amprasaria and Kiyur Vadodaria, Roma, who is partner now and wife. We all were completely, we met at Doshi's office by chance, and Sarosh said, "Are you a member of COA?" And I said, "Yes." She said, can we use your COA number to enroll in this competition? And that's how it started, and we won the damn thing. And of course, Shantanu and Manisha were the other team that won it at the Vardha competition. And we worked together. So, it was completely, we didn't know the people, we didn't know what it meant to start a practice, and you were kind of bumbling along. And if I'm to be honest, that's exactly how we run the practice. We've just taken things as it comes. And that's why these days when I'm talking and thinking about what we do, I think it's really important, this bumbling along, kind of figuring it out as we go, is very, very, very important to the way that we structure our work in the office. And I call it incremental practicing. It's something that I've been interested in from the time I was a student in 4th and 5th year, about this idea of incrementality, of not the big project, not the big question that you ask when you get out into the field as to what's your direction, or what are you interested in, but the small bits that you know you're interested in. So I find it a particularly useful way when you think about small things to practice in a time of doubt. You know, if you start asking your questions about, big questions about how the world is today and how it's changing so rapidly that your answer for today is different and your answer for tomorrow will be different. And so those things that you can be a little bit certain about, you stick to those and you answer those questions and you build the practice brick by brick, literally, in order that you develop a certain pattern of what I would call, not certainty, but some consistency at least. And as much as incremental practice for me means this kind of building the practice, it also means the actuality of the projects that we have worked with. And as you see, I mean, I'm going to use two projects as kind of thematic projects to discuss what the office is interested in. All these, the opportunities that you give me by inviting me or other places is an opportunity to look at one's work in a new frame every time. Is there a way that you can make sense of what you're doing? So I decided this time that we take two projects. On the left-hand side is a small house that we did in Alibag, and on the right hand is a small studio that we did in Ahmedabad. And they both were constructed very differently, but interestingly they had the same brief. My mother, for whom I built the first house, didn't have money. Just didn't have enough money to build the house all at once. So it's taken about 10 years to build it to what you're seeing in the photograph. And it actually started like that. So in 2000, this is what my mother, myself, a carpenter, and one mason built using thatch, cement pipes, toilet pipes, filling them with concrete and just getting it built so we could use it. We had the land, it was expensive land that my mother inherited. And we didn't have money to build it, so we simply put it out there and started. We used this this particular jhopdi, as we call it, for about 4 years. She used it for 4 years. That's her standing there. And every year, when we type the chap, the plan would change a little bit. So if you see, there's a vertical. Do I have a pointer? No. Anyway, there's a vertical chap there, which was actually a shower where you could bathe and so on. And it was just like plastic pipes carrying water and so on. But 4 years is a long time, and the plan kept evolving on this existing plinth. The CRZ had come into existence, and this land was under dispute. And so by the time we sorted out the court case, also the CRZ didn't allow us to build. So this was a good way to build and still be within the coastal regulation zone, till we got permission that actually the property belonged us before CRZ, so we should be allowed to build. But coming back to this, the other project, which is in Ahmedabad, was for a very well-known graphic designer and his daughter, who's also now a graphic designer, and it's their studio, which was an annex to their house. And there were 2 or 3 very important parts of that brief. They use their house and studio as an animal shelter for stray animals and birds that get hurt. So at any point in time, there are about 60 to 70 animals living with them in their house. The one thing was that they wanted us to build in a manner that the animals do not get disturbed. And I kid you not, this was part of the brief, because they were worried that labor, construction, stacking of material would hurt the animals that were unwell and severely injured. And so there was that point that we had a time during the day that we could not construct. And on the other hand, we had to finish the entire construction in 2.5 months. That was all that we were given. So the entire studio is actually completely modular, precast, prefabricated, and except for the pile foundations, which took us 1 out of the 2.5 months to do, everything is done off-site and brought on-site and assembled. The other thing about that project was that it was to grow infinitely. That this ground floor that you see right now, and I'll be showing you other images, was supposed to be the starting point, and the project was to grow to G+2. So you've got a very small kind of footprint which is going to grow in time. So one was out of necessity, and the other one was the fact that all like domestic functions kind of grow and change over time, and that you want to maximize them, but you may not have the resources at that time to kind of actualize it. And this is all the other architectural kind of values that one still holds good, and is still what you're kind of interested in: the quality of light, the material, the sense of space, all those things I'll take for granted when I'm talking. We all as architects will have our own sensibilities, but those are the essential parts that one is concentrating on, irrespective of how complex the brief is, or what the client's restrictions are. That quality one is still after. This was how we built initially. Actually, what we did was we built just the first level of increment was that the house, the jhopdi, actually just became a kind of pavilion. So we kind of, I'll take you to the plan. What we did is, if you see the organization of the plan, you've got two rooms. You've got the room on the top, and actually just in front.
Yes,
So if you look at it, this is the main house. That's an annex added even later. So you've just got one big bedroom and study with a toilet, and then you've got a store here. Originally, this was all open. This was just, all of this was veranda. So about 70% of the house, 60% of the house was veranda. And what my mother would do was simply collapse the house into the bedroom, collapse the kitchen into the store, and the house would just remain open. And everything that needed to be locked would go into those two rooms. And then over time, we added windows, we added doors, we added various other elements, grills now, because there's a lot more density in Alibag, so density of people, therefore security has become an issue. These were the drawings that we made at the time. And we added an annexing. So over time, as we've had funds, money, investments have fructified, we've kept adding to all of this. But the kind of sense of space that we were interested in, the kind of construction system that you can see, actually was learning from Ahmedabad. We, in the old city and in many parts of Bombay also, you find what we call Kulia Pakri, which is like you put steel girders and you simply put Kota stone or Shabat stone on top. It's a very desi kind of way. So we actually did it with wood and Kadapa stone. And the entire joinery came out from the fact that I wanted this forest of columns. The forest of columns actually came from the way that the grills and the jhap of the jhopdi was made. Sorry, the jhap of the jhopdi has this kind of sense of light that comes through it, which I wanted to somehow abstract and bring into the space of the building. So even the, sorry, I think I missed a couple of slides here. But even the kind of grills that we've developed for this project has that sense of a screen. And the structure, I wanted the columns to be 65 millimeters and not more than that, so that you get these very thin lines in space that really controls the way the light and all that comes through. So it was a very tangible kind of exercise, and all the details and the kind of articulation comes out of that, the windows. Yeah, you can see the grills on your left side of the screen coming out of this sense of wanting it that way. I lost the slide. And then of course, now we've got a pool and all of those kind of luxuries. So starting from a jhopdi, very, very basic, we've been able to add over 10 years, incrementally, little by little by little, to get quite a rich environment. It does require patience, and but what it does allow you to do is to articulate your ideas slowly. You're no longer forced to have that one brilliant moment or flash of idea at the beginning of your project and then realize it in the next 2 months, and that's it, the project's over. Over time, as you're building, as you're adding, you're constantly refining the idea, and you are able to kind of hone it, because things are happening and you're actually building as you're thinking. So, I mean, at that time, the kind of ideas that we were very, very fascinated by in the office was this idea of forests, about how light and space in forests are. And what we kind of sensed was this is really important in our Indian sense of space. It has a kind of density, okay, and that density just comes from a lot of verticals, the trunks of trees, the way that foliage is, and the fact that light comes from top down and not horizontally. Now, if you take a cave, for example, the sense of light is very different. In a cave, from which the idea of building comes, the light always comes horizontally, and therefore you get light and space of a certain type. We were fascinated by this idea of light coming in vertically and kind of scattering and shattering and dispersing in ways, and you will see that recurrent in the kind of what our efforts are. How successful it is a different matter, but that is what we were interested in. And also the other kind of scale was of the landscape. So Chandni, who's working with me on the studio, she and another couple of students from CEPT at the time that they were students made this drawing on top, which is of the beach where their house was, which is about 7 kilometers long. For those of you who know Alibag, this is Kihim Beach. And out of, we made a drawing, the actual size of that drawing is about 7 meters. And it goes into great detail. So this is one detail, and if you were to zoom in further, it gives you all the kind of how would you say, the ecology of that place, from fishing to what kind of anemones and crabs you have. It's all embedded into the way that they made that fantastic drawing. But what I was really interested in that time was looking at the relationship between building, landscape, and the kind of topography that there is from the hill to the sea. And what we found about even the colonial houses that were existing there before us was that the Brits really understood how to site a house, whether it's on the dune, whether it's on the flat, whether it's in the orchard, whether it's in the plantation, and that the way that they actually site a house makes connections between these. And this is actually what, wherever we've had projects, one of the things that's interested me is to document research during the 1.5 years or 2 years that we are doing a project there. Its surrounds. So you will see this both here and the other projects that we do. And this is the kind of interesting map that we recently made of all the projects we've done in Alibag over time. There are totally 15 of them, from concrete houses to those in wood and stone, and the kind of typological variations that we've experimented with over time. So it's also a way of looking back at what you're doing and analyzing your own work. And these are some of the houses that we've all done in a consistent kind of language, with the sloping roof and the wooden structure and stone. And yet, I mean, I don't have the time here to get into detail. Each of this is a kind of development of that particular idea of the verticality, the forest, the sense of light, and of course the tectonic details of how you put two materials together. Now this whole idea, so when I'm talking of incrementality, I'm talking about doing little bits. You're doing things at the level of detail, you're doing things at the level of the plan of the house, you're doing things at the level of the landscape, you're engaging in different ways. Not all of it makes sense at that time, it's just that you're following an interest, and you're beginning to see this pattern come together, at least for you. And you might ask that then what's the kind of relationship with incrementality with something like, let's say, infrastructure or something that's not necessarily domestic. And we were also asking that question, whether beyond the domestic you can really use this idea of doing things bit by bit or layer by layer over time in any kind of way. And this very interesting project came a little bit further south. This is a creek near the village of Thal. And we had a client whose house we had done, but who had a very interesting problem. Their house, the property ends on this creek. And if you see, the creek comes in here. There's actually a smashan at the end. There's a bridge over there which takes them into this property. And what was happening is this whole edge was getting completely eroded. And the first response was that right along the creek, which goes almost 140 meters into their property, why don't we build a wall? And at that point of time, let me just tell you that the kind of budgets that we are dealing with here is about 1,500 to 1,800 rupees a square foot is what we built for, complete. And the house the extension, the annex that we were building them over here was of a cost of about 18 lakhs. This was in 2008 or so, 18 lakhs. And the cost of the compound wall was going to come to about 9 lakhs. So you can just imagine that if we were to make that compound wall, what it would be. Now the other problem was, the real problem was that the panchayat in that area wanted a 4 lakh bribe in order to give us permission to build this wall. And the 4 lakh was basically because the panchayat, they control the mafia that provides or supplies stone. So we couldn't get stone. We couldn't get stone to build the wall if we didn't pay the bribe. It was as simple as that. And my clients actually live in Paris, so they're reasonably fussy about I'm going to bribe. So how do you then save the land? And how do you do? So we tried this incremental approach again. So what we did was we built this kind of truss, okay, a kind of a fence made with a truss, and we lined it with what you can see is an agri-net and some mesh, and we just grew stuff that then would harden over time. And unfortunately, I don't have the latest photographs of this. As you can see, we are not very strong on documentation. But we planted mangroves and all kinds of cacti and various kinds of water plants. And now it breaks the force of all of that. So it kind of made us think that it's possible to kind of even deal with larger issues of erosion and things that one would do with very hard materials in this time method, and perhaps there's an ecology and one can develop that way of thinking. So this is where we were. Now simultaneously with this, so in Alibag we are dealing with these light materials, verticals, wood, timber structure, this filigree of columns that I was telling you about. And simultaneously in Udaipur, we had an English client who wanted to build in the early 2003 what he called Eco House. And at that time, sustainability was a big buzzword, it still is. But at that time, there's a lot of energy about doing things in this manner. And it's partly at that time that we gave our firm the name Anthill, with all those ecological ideas in mind. And this project required a very, how would you say? I mean, he wanted to know where energy, embodiment, all of that was going into the building. And so we built this with local craftsmen that we started working with. We actually set up the team that constructed a large part of this house. And but it was still a very technocratic sustainability that he was interested in. Being British and from Europe, he wanted solar cells and recyclable energy, windmills, and all that. A lot of that stuff we didn't implement because we were able to do some of it passively. And I'll explain. So, for example, if you see the servants' quarters that lies at the firstly he bought Kharaba land, which is all rock, which goes up and it's quite steep. And you can see therefore the building's embedded into the rock. And what we've got is that ship-like, hull-like roof is actually a terrace garden which keeps it cool. And what his challenge to us was that there should be an 8-degree difference between inside and outside. And this is one project where we have done post-occupancy research precisely because he is in the environmental business. He puts all these sensors around and checks whether what we talked actually works or not. I have to say that it's one of the projects that have been reasonably successful. We get about a 9 to 10 degree difference between inside and outside, just by thermal mass. And we did work with an environmental engineer on this, and that's the courtyard. And this is still under construction. So what we did was we played between these very orthogonal buildings, which sit against the rock that we were excavating, and then you get the light and the play through that. And that's actually how the house sits. So what you've got is you've got the servants' quarters over there, you've got this steep hill going up, and that's actually a very interesting device that we designed, and it was implemented by a mechanical engineering company from Bombay, in fact from Vadala. And it's a lift that moves vertically and then diagonally up and takes you to the house there. Because Mr. Moss was about 65 years old. And Mr. Moss started this company for which we did this called Moss Energy. And it was actually a very interesting story. He and the Maharaja used to play cricket for Cambridge together. And one day Malcolm was standing at the city palace and complaining like many Firams do. At that time there was a diesel run boat that used to take you from city palace to the lake palace. And it's like, you Indians know, you'll screw up everything. There's this fat. You've got this fantastic heritage site and you're all screwing it up with this terrible sound and all. Why don't you at least do some solar boat and all? So Maharaja no less saying like, you Firams come here, white skin, you'll say anything, you'll know nothing about the kind of resources we have. If you want to do it, you do it. So this guy took it personally. He had a multi-million-dollar pound chemical company in Surrey, which he sold. Okay, he started this Moss Energy and he landed up and he decided to live in Udaipur. And for 5 years they had, I don't know if you'll do a Google, you'll know there was this solar car rally that used to take place in Rajasthan every year for 5 years, which was actually run by Malcolm. And in fact his sons, who were 13 and 18 at the time, used to build their own solar cars and take part in the rally. So those are the kind of people we were dealing with. So for him, he wanted this solar power lift which would take him up over there. He was 65 or so at the time, and take you there, and then you would actually descend into the house. all of that. So being an environmentalist, they still wanted his pool and all that, just to tell you. So I mean, that's a huge swimming pool that sits over the living space, which overlooks the view. And that again starts acting as thermal mass for all of that. And the entire plinth of that building, and in fact the entire plinth of all of those bedrooms on top, is a harvesting tank of water. And so you've got water below, water above, and you've got living spaces in the middle. That's how you really look at the section. Each of those roofs are actually what we used to call dinosaur eggs in the office. But they are like all taken for solar orientation. And then of course we were from CEPT, so we had to kind of do this modern interpretation of the Jaroka and all that kind of stuff. So you'll see those helmet things through which you look at the view and all that. That's what you kind of get when you go out and you look out at the landscape. So it's quite spectacular when you look out there. And that's the pool. Those are all the solar panels which actually were supposed to be on the roof. But you know what these guys did? One weekend they disconnected 2 of them, brought it down, and they actually challenged us that we'll be able to heat the pool with like 2 1.5 by 1 meter solar panels. No engineer in his right mind will say that that's possible. It actually does it. It only heats it down by 3 degrees. The thing is, 3 degrees is all you need not to get that chakta when you're going into the water. And that's actually what you really need. So what they were doing was, through all of this, we were kind of thinking about what is the right amount of technology to use in this. By the way, all that plantation you see was another big fiasco in those. If you remember, there's this, a lot of literature on Jatropha. Jatropha is this plant that gives you biodiesel, or suppose it is supposed to. And so Mercedes in Pune had made a kind of statement that they were growing 500 acres of Jatropha. So Moss said, we'll do it. So the entire site became this monoculture of Jatropha, not very environmentally friendly or diverse. But this is then what it's like inside the house. And Mr. Moss also has very eclectic furniture taste, as you can see. And that's below the pool. So when you're sitting and collecting material from the 16th century onwards. So all of this stuff that you see are chhajjas from dilapidated buildings that he's bought from the government of Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, etc. While we were working on this project, which we continue to work on, we've been working on it now for about 10 years. There was news that a fort in Madhya Pradesh had fallen, and there was this beautiful patina stone that the government was selling. Okay, some of that stone is about 450 years old. John sent 60 trucks, and we got it all fired up here. That's the speed at which they move. Now, the thing is, and I'll give you, like when we wanted to do landscape design here, he just bought the whole nursery in Pune and transferred it to our site. So then, like, you're doing mix and match. So then you're like, you guys want to work with Photoshop? This is the real deal, man. Okay, so this is some of the material, and there's now a lot of this is in a nice shed, and there are some elephants which are 6 meters high, not 6 meters, they're about 3 meters high, all in one solid block of granite from Mughal times and so on. I'll tell you some of the most surreal things that I've done with John. I've actually had wine in Badshah Akbar's Belgian wine glasses. Okay, I'm not kidding you. Okay, this is the kind of people, absurd people. Now what do you do? Okay, do you say you will not work with this? On the other hand, as I told you, I come from CEPT, I do interpretations of Jarokas, I don't do Jarokas. And then you're confronted with this guy who has only Jarokas. And lots of them. And so what his thing was that, the thing is that he bought also with this very small B and C grade heritage properties from Delhi, all the way down. If you look at the tourist map from Alwar, all the way down to Udaipur. So that if like, you've got a fancy guy who wants a boutique hotel, you could have 10 stops, see all the great places in Rajasthan, and stay in John's hotel, and you get a package deal for God knows how much. Okay. But what we needed to do was therefore have a hotel or a hospitality project which was modern but used all these old materials. And on some of the sites we had very beautiful old buildings as well, but very small, and therefore not in the radar of the heritage community. So the site that we worked on was a small hunting lodge, which is actually only maybe 15 feet by 20 feet, and with a small aula, what they call, and a tower and all of those kind of things. And the first thing we did was we actually spent a lot of time from the office setting up a team that could actually implement this, because there's no point doing concrete stuff and then sticking that stuff in. So we really developed over a period of about a year. There were a couple of guys from office who lived on site and developed this team of traditional craftsmen who could implement, finish some of those pieces that I showed you are broken. They had to be repaired and brought back to scratch. And so there was this side of it. But we also, and one thing that I've not been able to tell you guys is that when you're engaging with strange contexts, people like this, there's a feedback into your office. So it's not that we are putting a kind of crafts team out there that's doing building craft, but the thing is, you realize that we are so taught to produce architecture through a literary method. You have to be literate. I am beating the hell out of these guys to make proper drawings. That's a form of literacy. You put it down on paper, you draw it, you notate it, you annotate it. All of that is a form of literacy. But our oral crafts tradition, the guys that we were working with, they were all, they don't read and write. They don't read and write, yeah. And therefore they couldn't read our drawings. Now the first month, we made beautiful drawings. And we pride ourselves at that. And nobody could read our drawings. And we come and there were actually dimensional problems in the line out. And we said, we can't do this. This is just impossible amount of time and energy this is going to take from us. And it was not commensurate with the fee either. So we had to find a way. And it was Sivit, one of the architects working in my office, who figured that when he actually spoke out the dimensions to the masons, they never forgot it. So we'd give them a line, we'd read off 12 consecutive dimensions and another 8 dimensions, and we would get perfect work. You gave them the drawing and you expected them to read it, they couldn't read. So the oral tradition meant you had to be oral. And then what is the value of a bloody drawing in your office? The only thing that the drawing does is for you to remember the dimensions that you've given. So it becomes a mimetic device, it's not a communicatory device. It completely changed the way that our office was working on that drawing. Also, it gives you a great deal of angst, because you come from this tradition of Rajay, Doshi, drawing, Falana, Digna, and you're saying that drawing is not valid. Drawing has actually got no value in this project. What do? It sets the whole office, and then you can't have half the office saying drawing is of value, half the office saying drawing is not of value. That's asking for trouble. So anyway, but this is what happened, and slowly we started working with these buildings. On your left side is what we are adding, and on the right side is the existing stuff. So this is all stuff that we've designed. If you actually look at the plan, it's extremely modernist. It's what I like to call a Corbusian house in a ghungat. Okay. So it's like, if you see, there's like a void at the bottom, there's a void at the top, there's mass going through. This could never have happened in traditional Mewadi architecture. But look at those jharokas, man. They still give me goosebumps. Okay, but that was the project. And like I said, there's an ethics that's involved here, and I question it all the time, and I'm open to discussion about it, because you have different takes on it. I don't think that I would have been able to talk about a lot of the dimensions of architecture that we do in the office now had we not done this project. So anyway, this is how it's going. But the level of craftsmanship and the level of detail and the level of finesse to things that we've been able to achieve there has been very, very satisfying. So this whole composition is actually the entrance to the hotel, and that's it. So it's still going on. We're doing landscape and we're adding rooms to it now. We've got a modular kind of hotel which we can add rooms every year. So again, it's something that, John does this when he has money, we build. When he doesn't have money, we are on hold. So it goes on like this. So this is also, this is much more refined version of that incrementality that I was telling you, because we put in the craft system, we've got the economics worked out with him, we've got a system of drawing this incrementality, not drawing this incrementality in the office, the way that we work. It's got a system of its own. Now, this is something that I know there are quite a few people interested to know about, this pink house that we did. So now simultaneously, we're doing urban projects where the nature of the project cannot afford the kind of incrementality and time that we are talking about. This was a very interesting project, again, which had great feedback, and we discussed it in class yesterday. The client came to us. It's a very, very tight site. It's a long linear site. It's about 27 meters by, I think, 3 plus 6, so 9 meters wide. So you get a footprint of about 21 by 6 in metric terms, and it's a common wall. So these are Bank of Baroda staff quarters from the 70s. One was broken down because it was too dingy, so light was a very important part of the reason that we were rebuilding the project. The clients were extremely faithful followers of Satya Sai Baba, and initially the project that came to us was of retrofitting the old Bank of Baroda project, and they went to ask Baba about what they should do. And Baba said, simply rename the house. He said, no, you have to build Sai Naina. And that was the indication for them that the old would not continue, that something new need to be made. So we demolished the house. It was nothing to do with architecture. It was a symbolic move. And I was telling people that I'm reasonably agnostic, but they were very close family friends from my wife's side. And the level of faith they had was incredible. And in fact, at the time we started this project, they didn't have the finances to do the whole project. They didn't know how they were going to actually complete it. Yeah, there were just so many open-ended things about, but they had this faith that Baba said, build this house, so we'll build this house. And so they went to Baba for the brief as well. And Baba gave us the brief. I kid you not. So he gave us five points that we had to follow. And some of them were reasonably sensible. The first one, he said that the plinth must be 5 steps up from the road, which seemed good. It was a low-lying area. There's a slum nearby. There's a lot of water collection. All those things work. He said that the building must be predominantly baby pink in color. And he said that because the house was to be designed for Naina Aunty, that the elevation must have an eye motif in it. And the house must have a lift, and the building must be lighter as it goes up. And the way that he actually told us that the building should be lighter is that the satsang or the bhajan area should be on top. So it made complete sense in earthquake terms that the higher you go, the lighter it gets. The larger spans are on top, the smaller spans are below. So apart from the eye and the pink, everything made reasonable sense. But there was no question of arguing on this. And this is the crazy thing about the symbolic value of certain things. You can talk about function, you can argue about program, you can even talk about a particular detail in rational terms. This cannot be argued about. Where would you start? No, I think green is better. I mean, that's ridiculous. Okay, so the thing is, so you can't have that argument. And pink is not my favorite color. And actually, Roma, my wife, she did a very, very interesting exercise. And I was telling we actually took 400 modern paintings from 1890 to 1930, I think is the time frame we took. And you'd be shocked to know how much Picasso, Matisse, Monet, Manet used pink. And we were just looking at the kind of things, and it opened up for me that pink is not pink if you use it with blue or green. So when you put the flowers of the lily along with the reflection of the water, that's when you start getting the combinations that you could look for. So it started opening up that whole dimension. And again, if you're a brick and concrete guy from Ahmedabad, color is not going to be your strong point. So these were the kind of exercises that we were doing. The other exercise we did was that we went around Ahmedabad and actually looked in the neighborhood of our home and our office, that there was almost 50 to 60% of the buildings were pink. And if you actually look around, even in Bombay, you'll be surprised when you look closely how much pink there is in the world. Anyway, so we made all these models, monochrome to start with because that's the only way we know, and then we Photoshop it to see what we could do. And just so that we get into the plan, Roma actually came up with this idea that we are not going to do this motif without it having some kind of functional or programmatic idea behind it. So what she did was she took the idea of the eye and the aperture that we were supposed to do and kind of embedded it into the staircase. And when you kind of look at the staircase, what it did was because of the 2 flights, it gave us a depth to play with the aperture of the opening. And then because the section of the staircase shifts, we could actually use the aperture to bring in light in different ways. So we started looking at the eye as a device for bringing in light rather than just a motif that you stick on the facade. And what you see over here, the staircase and that opening is what the eye became. The house was actually designed for ground+1, and the entire top part was made out of recycled wood from Alam. And we realized that the kind of cost that we were working with, unless we built it ourselves, because we were getting a very nominal fee for this, unless we built it ourselves, A, we would not be able to afford doing the project for our client, and B, the project itself wouldn't be buildable in the cost if we got a full-scale contractor to do it. So that's the eye window that we actually worked out, and it brings in light in this manner. So this is from inside. You can see there's this double height slit going up, which is actually the bottom of the top flight of staircase. What we were able to convince them to do is to leave the staircase outside. So you actually go out of the house to go up. I'm just saying, in programmatic terms, that was very, very important. And yet you have a kind of imagination of the whole house working as one space, even though you can actually partition off each floor as a separate apartment if you wanted to. So they do live as a joint family. So for us, partially the question was, if you're in a joint family, how do you have a sense of the whole house? But if, let's say, the 2 sons are living separately, how do they get their sense of privacy and the separateness? If you want to give the top floor out on rent, how do you do that? And the external staircase worked really well for all these kind of things. Which means, like, you just go out of the main door and up. So internally, everything feels kind of, what would you say, compact and complete, but the house kind of connects. So this is the kind of space that you get and the light that you get at various levels through that stair and eye window. And then when you come to the top, it's much more lit because of the light structure of the wood and all of that. And this way of bringing in light we had worked on. This is another project in Bangalore, but we had worked on this. This is a kind of motif that recurs in a lot of the way that we work when we start going up. We start making houses that open up a little bit more and have much more light on top because it's easier to do. So that's the house in Bangalore. This is Ahmedabad. This is the same house. So very basic materials. Here actually there's a very ingenious kind of, how do you say, not device, but what would you say, design that our carpenter came up with. And in order to do this project, to build the roof and all of that, we started a wood workshop. We decided that if we were going to do this project, we might as well use what we were going to earn from it, and that would give us control, because at that cost price, you couldn't get good construction. So if we were doing it ourselves, we get good construction, we earn a little extra money, and we start this workshop. So all this stuff is done by us, a carpenter, myself, a couple of guys from set who wanted to take up carpentry as their profession, or at least woodwork as their profession. So if you see, what we did was, we dimensioned the doors and windows such that if you cut out this out of a standard panel flush door, you get the window. So you only buy a door and you get a door and a window. It's not these, but actually I don't have, maybe I have a photograph of the window. Yeah, these windows. So these windows actually come out of those doors. You just cut out the panel and then put in the glass. So that was the way that we were able to economize. But also then, because you're working, you have the workshop and your office is in the workshop, you have this level of control on the kind of wood you want to put together, the textures that come together, the way color comes together, the way joinery works. All of that you have a very kind of close contact with. And also you're seeing patterns in the workshop that are then affecting the way that you work and design. And that's what our workshop, and that's how our office looked for a very long time. So we actually left Center Point, which is when office was house and home, and we went into this industrial area. And it was fantastic because all the guys around us, later some of my students started what is called the Clay Club and now doing very well, which was just 2 galas down. And they were doing stuff with ceramic and they were doing stuff with all kinds of clay stuff, which you can then plug into and design with. Yeah, and this was just, so that was how our team would work. So there are 2 architects, there are 3 carpenters. You can see the drawings up in the background, discussions on how one, so that's a 1:2 or 1:5 drawing of a chair. That's the chair. And we can do all this kind of furniture. The problem was that it started off great. You can do all, so this is actually furniture that we did for NCPA here for the Russian music school. It then became, we started cataloging and it became a little bit more of a business. And we decided, we made this really interesting jhula that is like, you can flip the backrests in parts so that it becomes a love jhula, like a love seat, all kinds of things. I can't imagine how, actually when you think about it, it's a little difficult to swing on, but yeah. And then we did this really wonderful thing which became very well known for a while in schools in Ahmedabad, where we designed this kindergarten cart which is like really light, and it allows you to place, it allows you to change formats within the classroom. So it kind of gathers around like this colorful flower, and kids can like pick it up and take it around and do it themselves. So a 3-year-old can do this, and you can put them in a line and do normal lecture, classroom type seating. So I mean, you can see we were having a lot of fun, and we were doing all this kind of stuff. And then reality hit. Reality hit means, on one hand we started so that we could do design. We wanted to design everything that goes into our buildings. The other reason we started was the creative cycle in architecture is very large. If you start a project today, it takes 18 months to 2 years by which the cycle comes around. So the learning on design, let's say I've got an idea, by the time the idea is tested, it's 2 years later. Most likely I've forgotten the idea and I've forgotten to test it. Because we're not very good with post-occupancy leave. Oh, I remember my concept and I'm going to check it now. Oh, nahi hota hai. I'm very happy, it got built. But with, so what we wanted to introduce a cycle of working which is a little bit faster and you get feedback on your design, and furniture really allowed you to do that. Material, if you're looking at furniture not just in terms of commercial sense that it's going to look like a Wegener chair or it's going to look like a Eames chair, but actually get into the joinery of it, then there's a lot of learning in detailing, in construction and all of that, material technology and tools. You learn your tools. And so all of this was very good. But so largely the first few times we were doing work for our own projects, which is a little bit high and you have a budget and so on. And then we realized this is not economical. If you really want to make boutique design furniture work, your price range has to go up. Which means yes, you will be charging 3 lakhs for a sofa and not 35,000 or whatever it is we were charging. And yet we realized that if you're going into that bracket, then you need a completely different level of precision, the kind of finesse with which it's made, which you can't do with a craftsman. Because a craftsman will always have the imprint of the hand on it. Okay, and there will be that 19-20 as they say. Which doesn't mean it's bad, but that means also your detailing comes from that logic. It doesn't come from the logic of the machine. So your detailing has to, your mind has to shift between craft and machine. So that shift was very difficult. I don't think in machining terms. And the second thing was the whole point was to be in partnership with the craft. So either you really up your ante in terms of price and make it into a boutique 8 lakh sofa, or you say we'll go into mass. So we said we'll go into mass. Okay, and so we started doing school furniture. Every time you do school furniture, you get 100, 200, 300 piece order. Now what we found was over time, we could do about 100 to 120 pieces of furniture a month without compromising the quality of the furniture. But the minute you asked us to do 400 pieces, we were screwed. We just couldn't maintain quality. And then we'd start getting into all kinds of difficulty in terms of logistics, of transport, packing, and those kind of things really started hurting us. So what we started doing was we started looking, and it also happened that we started looking at retail clients. And this is one of our retail clients for whom now we do quite a lot of architecture also. But they were a young tea company which based out of Mulund. And we did all their shop and all that, so all their furniture. So again, it gives us that kind of mid-range quantum. That you don't have to do like 400 pieces of furniture, but you do like maybe 30 shops a month. And that means that you get 120 pieces of furniture. So we modularized it. And this was again great learning in terms of dimension, material. And we just made modules of furniture that would then go all over the country. We just had to pack and ship to them. And they would become their shop-in-shop stuff. And these were the kind of things, they became more elaborate as we started going around. And this is actually in Bandra. This is their Bandra store that we did. And this is what it looks like. This is in Nature's Basket. So we started getting into all this kind of retail design and coming out of furniture. And then of course we could do really, really fine, detailed stuff when the budgets allowed. So this is a trolley that the Tea Culture of the World company made for Gauri Khan because she drinks their tea. And then this is a kind of gift that they give her on Diwali. Even I won't. So anyway, but I get to design the trolley. And this is stuff that we made for the Oberoi in Delhi, where they have their tea displays over there. And then for the international airport. And their office, which was then made in similar kind of aesthetic. This is roof studies that we did for their warehouse in Bhiwandi. And that brings us to the fact that, I mean, when you're doing all this, you don't think twice about the fact that you can make. And the 5 years that I did run the workshop, one of the things that changed dramatically is my sense of time in committing to a project. Prior to that, because we were working with craft and we were working with people, I would say no. Someone came saying like they wanted a project in 2 weeks' time, I'd just say no. I'd just say no, not possible. At this point in time, this is actually the installation that we did for our Step 12 exhibition. I could do an installation like this in 2.5 weeks. Ready. Drawing, design, model, done, made. And that was the speed at which we were doing work at the end of it. That all of this started becoming very, I mean, the kind of speed that one was willing to exercise was much faster. And that opened up the office in different ways. So this is an interior that we were then able to do in places like Bombay, which I used to earlier find very difficult to work in precisely because of the speed. So this is in Fort, it's a legal office. And we made everything in the workshop and shipped it here. You will see everything from the chairs are designed and made by us and simply fitted here. Only the civil work happened here. The door handles, everything came from there. We had these funky desks which are all completely, what would we say, curved and chamfered and all of that kind of stuff. And this is like, this is interesting point because yesterday we were talking in the studio about whether it's possible to practice in the idealistic way that sometimes you leave college with. Now this is a project, this is a legal office in which I had to convince the client that we should cut out about 12% of the floor space in Fort. Okay, think about that in terms of property. And I did convince him. If you're willing to get into a discussion and a dialogue and talk in architectural terms, and it is possible to have, it's not always that it happens, but it happens. But if you're not going to make that, you're not going to start that conversation, it's not going to happen. And I think that, I mean, I think for example, oh, it's not here, but the kind of sense of space you get because of the skylights is very important. Yeah, I don't have the one photograph I wanted to show you, but anyway. So this idea of increment, and you know, you're taking it as it comes. You're being able to deal with a small thing from furniture to landscape. You're looking at something that is cyclic in time and that grows, and it's not static. It's not like this project is over. And sometimes it's frustrating because you're dealing with the same person for 10 years, and you know they are growing, you're growing, and it becomes a sometimes very tedious kind of relationship. And sometimes it's very, very rewarding. It's a kind of old world patronage kind of system. Not all the work that we do is like this, but this is what I'm putting forward to you today. Now this is the second trajectory that I mentioned to you, the steel and glass box that we made for the graphic designer. And when we were told that it has to grow over time, we did this kind of matrix of all possible growth. So you will see that that's the initial condition, And each of this is a possible trajectory of growth that we simulated at the beginning of the project. So this is now Sarosh, with whom we started practice. He's based out of New York. He presently works for Scopidio and Diller. Earlier he used to work for Hedzanadimira. Now he's teaching at Syracuse and Ithaca, and we work over the internet. And there are selected projects like this one which we collaborate on, and there are some which he doesn't have time and we don't have time to work with. But this was certainly one that we wanted to work together on. And this simulation was done across. And because we, like I told you, there was this real need to build this building in a very short period of time. We thought about it componentially, and the entire kind of elemental nature of the building came out of that part of the brief. But one of the most important parts of this design, as you can see, where's the architecture in this? It's largely structure. But the architecture of this was that we wanted the thinnest possible column. This is 33 by 66 mm column. Okay, and they're design plus G plus 2. Okay, and we sat with the structural engineer, who's a wonderful young guy from Ahmedabad, Hotel, and we sat with him, with his tag model, and continued working. And the only breakthrough that made this design possible was that if you look at the cross bracing required for shear, if you look at normal or usual design by structural engineer, you will get the cross in a single bay of the structure. By distributing the cross over two bays, what normally would have happened is that the shear would have been concentrated at these points, and therefore it would have been necessary to make these two columns heavier in order to take the shear. And then, being architects, we would not have allowed that the columns be different sizes, so we would have standardized all the columns based on the heaviness of those two columns. By distributing the shear across three bays, we were able to reduce it by this much. So the design was in the structure. And the idea was that one should be able to converse with the structural engineer to get the design that one wants. So that conversation was where this entire design hinged on. And you can see that it's all about bringing in light through the structure. And I mean, that's all there is to the design. There are these funicular concrete shells that are made by a company in Ahmedabad, which are simply placed. So it's that same Pidia Papri construction taken one level ahead, where instead of a plate of Ota stones, there's a concrete plate which has a shell, which allows us then to actually make a broader grid. So you can have a larger span. The only requirement, the only thing that dictated the size of that shell was that two people should be able to lift it up, so that we didn't need a crane on site because there was no crane on site. So it was a panel that weighed about 75 kilos. So based on that, we worked out the grid. So that the entire grid comes from there, and everything else is light. One very interesting thing about this project, and again it's feedback for the office. We worked. So the name of the graphic designer is KRVIA, who's one of the first graduates from NID, very, very, very famous at the time that M.K.Gandhi was alive. Has done all the forestry department's graphic, beautiful stuff that he does, and he was insistent that we put that skylight there and the skylight there. Actually, he was insistent that we put that skylight across, which is what you see here. That skylight which comes over Hazel's desk. Okay, and the reason I want to tell you this story is because sometimes it's the idea of being an architect, you take the position of privilege, of power. And this was one where my client is a mad bawa, so you can't take that position. He was insistent, and we were saying, like, listen, if you are making a glass box which has glass on three sides, what is the point of putting a skylight there? And I had this argument with him throughout, in fact, even during construction. And he said, I want the skylight. And it just became like this ego battle between architect and client. And finally we had the skylight. And then this pavilion sits in the middle of it's actually very wooded, which is one of the justifications that we can use glass. Okay, So it is completely vacant. And then spending a couple of days there, I realized what was happening. What was happening was in the morning and in the evening, the sun is low. And the light hits the trees, and at that point the skylight is completely inactive. And you're getting that filtered light bouncing off the tree, coming in from the sides. This light is what you get in the afternoon. Okay, you get this cut of light. And actually, if you think about that space without that cut, you would just not feel time move in that space. You just feel it completely static. Okay, and what that skylight does is just make this a very, very dynamic space. Otherwise, it would have become a view to the garden, and not something that box begins to glow in the middle of the afternoon, and then it dissipates in the evening. Okay, and it's something completely that I would never have visualized. And if I hadn't listened to Dan, we would never have realized that this is how it works. And it's just, he had this intuitive sense that under the forest, under the canopy of the tree, you need that skylight. So anyway, that's how it works. And you can see, when I say that it glows from inside that skylight, the kind of sense that it makes now. So then, earlier this year, you all may have heard of the Venice Space exhibition. We were asked by Rupali to, since we had made those conjectural, speculations of how it would grow, to actually make a model of how this studio would grow. So you can see that this is what the studio is at present, and this is a kind of speculative growth of what it could become. And this was a 1:20 model, so it's about that big. That was up at Venice Space, if you all saw it. And that's the model over there. And that's the whole speculation of how it could grow. And what we were very keen to do was not allow it to grow. This project has become such a, it's become a kind of symbol of the work that our office does, but we do nothing like this. Everyone kind of associates this now with, because it's also the only project we've published properly. So, I mean, the point is we wanted to also break that sense of image that the pristine box is not what we were after, but it's this idea of incrementality, the part being more visible, or the order of the part being stronger than the order of a resolved whole. So that's the way we made the model. And then this was the kind of speculation we did through Photoshop and all of that of how it could grow and so on. This was more realistic. So we put both together and allowed you to kind of imagine how it could be somewhere in the middle. So there's this whole kind of sense of incrementality. And I'd just like to go back to, and I'll end quickly on this note, that go back to my thesis as an undergraduate student, where I was studying the markets of Dhargarwad in Ahmedabad. And it's this cloth market that, it could be anywhere in an Indian city. And you get this kind of maze of what's happening. And I was intrigued that you could have this street which connects the Khajuri Masjid to the Jami Masjid, which is like actually saying in Isfahan that this is the market street that connects the main mosques with the bazaars. So this is the equivalent of the bazaar street, and yet I'm standing in one shop, and the movement across the other shop, this movement across between shops, is partially stronger than that street. How do we allow this to happen? How does this kind of encroachment take place where, like, 4 people who own shops make a kind of space of a department store across public space? And this really intrigued me. And I started looking at the way that we look at things. And of course, we've been so colonized in our way of thinking about cities. You guys might have read that book called Streets for People, where actually he says that the idea of a good street lies in its straightness. Okay, so Spiro Kostov will say that, all these guys will say that. So we've always thought that a straight street is a beautiful street. And that if you look at the building line, the building height, the coordination of fenestrations, that's what gives a European city its character, and that's what's beautiful. And all our bylaws are also based on that basic assumption that there should be a coordination between these things. And the fact that I can see at the end of a street will give me perspectival kind of prominence, etc. But you go to anywhere in our cities, you see a straight line. In fact, in India, so we hate lines, no? Seen anybody drive in a traffic line? Seen anybody stand in a queue? Impossible. We hate lines. So You look at the bloody section of the street, no, aage piche, aage piche. You look at the plan of the street, aage piche, aage piche. You look at the section of a pole house, aage piche, aage piche. What kind of space do you get? You get a mesh of these surfaces moving inside and outside. And you get this kind of place. You don't get just like the whole street going through where you can see what's happening at the end when you've just entered it. You have to go into one place, then you go to another nook, and you move. So you're moving from physical space to physical space to physical space. And what I figured out during my thesis was this was the incredible thing about the Indian city, was that we don't like lines because we love corners. We love corners because corners do things simultaneously. If I make one type of corner, there's a convex corner and a concave corner. If I look at all concave corners, okay, when I shake your hand, what do I do to my hand? I make it into a concave corner. When I give you a hug, what do I do with my body? I make it into a concave surface. When I hit you, what do? I make it into a convex surface. If I want to get aggressive, I get convex. If I want to get intimate, I get concave. Okay. When I want to go and sit in my corner and read, I go into a concave corner. I don't like sit at the edge, right? So I mean, the thing was, what I realized was that the corner is really important to us because unlike the line, which splits things into public, private, inside, outside, the corner does both at the same time. It makes a concave corner, and you can't make one without the other. But you can choose which one you want to use. You can choose which one you want to use. And the other incredible thing about the corner is when I occupy the corner, and this is that diagram, take any street in Ahmedabad, this uses Ahmedabad, take any street, occupy the corner, you get two more corners at a smaller scale. Occupy those corners, so that you imagine that there's a shop, then you get the chai wala, and then you get the other smaller scale, the guy with the matka sitting over there. So the kind of densities you can get in this kind of, in this system, it can absorb things that when you draw in terms of lines, you can never get. You cannot get those efficiencies because you're actually concentrating on the residue. You're not concentrating on what you're designing, you're concentrating on the residue that your design creates. And this is fantastic. For me, this was like, there's a whole mathematics to this. You know, and these are all the shops that I studied as a student. And then you go back and you see that's exactly what these guys are doing. Any line you give them, you're attaching things to it in order to make corners. The minute you make democratizing urban space, allowing for many more users than that hard straight line that says this belongs to you, this doesn't belong to you. And what I kind of, in those days, chaos theory and fractal geometry was a big deal. So you started looking at things like Kipinski's cube, which is finite volume, infinite surface area. And that for me has become a kind of model, image of the Indian city, that you've got finite volume and infinite surface area. And you start looking at this line, for example, you might know this is like a kind of model of the coastline. Okay, you can't actually say how long a coastline is. You have to say what is the scale at which you are looking at a coastline. If I look at it at Google Earth, I can draw a straight line down the west coast of. But if I zoom in and I start saying Bandra, Bandstand, then the amount of that line moves, that length is infinite. So in some sense it depends. If I zoom into the scale of a crab, that line is just increasing in length. So, I mean, that finite idea that something has got a finite length is very dubious, which is what all these sciences were talking about. And I could see this everywhere, whether you were looking at the Lingaraja temple, these are some models made by my history students, or you were looking at Hampi, you could just see this proliferation of surface everywhere. I mean, whether you walk into markets, whether you go to the Sunday market, whether you look at a procession, you see this. So I started realizing that this is an attitude to form. This is not just something that's happening by accident. It's not something that happens only in Ahmedabad. It happens everywhere. Okay, and you can see this in Bombay, and you can see this in Jodhpur. But how are we taught to appreciate architecture? That's some bloody model. So now I'm thinking, like, what is this and what is this? And I'm thinking this is the way that sun is being broken into shade all the time. Okay, whether you've got a carved surface, whatever you got, you're just breaking that surface into more surface. So 50% of the car, look at that, more than 50% of this photograph is shadowed. And look at that. Can you imagine that in the Indian sun? I would, you get that blurry line on the edge. Okay, and that's what you get. It's a beautiful building. But in that light, I cannot imagine it in this light. And I'm talking again of this shadow. Okay, why is this sense of the forest so important in the Indian context? And this is a student sketch of mine of the courtyard house in Ahmedabad. And you look at the carving in the vertical light that comes into a courtyard in Rajasthan or Ahmedabad, and it's this sense of breaking things into shadow. And then go back to practice. We designed our own pole house in Gurgaon. Okay, so this is a long linear plot, and what we started working with was how do we work this shadow and this idea of breaking surfaces. So in this, it's a zone 5. What we've got is a courtyard, and if you look at the plan, the courtyard actually starts rotating as you go up. So the courtyard is this way on the ground floor, like that on the first floor, and opens up on. So it's a courtyard which actually rotates. So we took that Villa Savoy fellow, and we started realizing that what we wanted to do was make the internal facade a free facade. The outside facade is fixed, but the internal facade of the courtyard is what is free. And that's what we've been playing with in all of this, and various types of transparencies and all that. But it all comes from this idea of increment, part, notion of light, space, the form that I'm talking about, how do you break things up into more and more surfaces. And as you can see, as I was telling you earlier, as you go up, it becomes lighter and lighter. These are some of the competitions we do. I'm just going to quickly run through a few of the other things that this way of working allows for. There's research on Ahmedabad. We've been looking at, just as we looked at Alibag, we looked very closely at the city of Ahmedabad. Some of you have seen this drawing because I presented it when I was presenting the studio. How one looks at a city, the assumption that the city is one big block versus the fact that the city is networked with a whole series of villages in the hinterland. So the way that we actually draw and conceptualize the city is also now more in parts than in one big theme. So I'm realizing at all scales, the idea of bigness is something that is in question here. We love doing things which are of some scale, but many. So I'm beginning to think that if you want to understand Indian urbanity and Indian architecture, you have to understand this concept of many and small together. That's where we are, and that these are researches that led very, very seamlessly into exhibitions. This was part of a Dutch exhibition that was done for the Festival of India in Amsterdam. It was a beautiful provocation put to us by the Dutch Institute, where we had to map 8 projects post-liberalization and then make a kind of projection of what our city would be like based on the ethics and values of those projects. And this was actually the Spanish government sponsored an exhibition of Ahmedabad in a sister city in Valladolid in Spain, which led to more research about how the city grows, settlement type, and so on. And then we did exhibition that was worked on by us. Some of our clients sponsored it, where we looked at the stepwells of Ahmedabad. And this one now goes into its 3rd edition and opens at Yale at the end of this month. So here what we realize is everybody knows the stepwell as a kind of singular building. Whereas actually what it is you get that many different types of scales. Those are the different, so you get from the individual house to the community to the city as a whole. You get different types of stepwells that are prevalent, and right now we found about 25 of them in the city of Ahmedabad, and they actually constitute a system. It's not just individual buildings. It's a system that regulates surface water with groundwater and settlement pattern. So that's it, and these are some of the things that we did in the exhibition. Of course, I told you about this installation that we made so that you had to climb up, look at some of the larger photographs. It was kind of mimicking the stepwell but in steel, and we did it at KRVIA, and then we did it at the Gandhi Ashram. And then it kind of led to this book. So all that understanding comes together into this tourist guide for Ahmedabad. Yeah, it's actually been very, very interesting, because I thought my initial attitude to doing a tourist guide was, yeah, what is this? I mean, this is really popular stuff after all this hard work and all. But it was amazing what we realized in this book, because we had to make itineraries, which means like there are maps. You make routes for tourists to traverse the city. And at the end of the book, when we made this kind of Knowledge map of Ahmedabad, what we realized is all of what I find largely, I would say, reflective of the architectural community in Ahmedabad, considers Ahmedabad architecturally is between a triangle between Sarkhej, Adalaj and the old city, which is a pie which is about 25% of the whole city, if I take the whole circle of Ahmedabad. So which means our conception of what constitutes architecture can be defined in 25% of the city. The remaining 75% of the city, nobody knows what's happening, nobody cares, that's not architecture. And that's a very, very dangerous state to be in for architects and as a community. To have that insular a perception of the environment you're living in, the built environment you're living in, it's astonishing. And this is a kind of realization, it's come from my own, looking at my own work. But I think that's what one has to do. And I don't know what we do about it, but certainly that realization is not a healthy one. Some of the other research that we're doing right now is on the architecture of Gandhi. I've been an employee of the Gandhi Ashram for a while now, documenting the work, so that's Hriday Kunj. We've been drawing it and comparing it with Korea and looking at the difference between Gandhi's idea of modern architecture and of course the more prevalent narrative that we have of modern architecture, which is harder tectonics. I'm presently looking at Hriday Kunj, which is on the right side, and it's deceptively vernacular in its making. Its organization is astoundingly modern in the way that Gandhi makes place for the individual and the way that Gandhi recalibrates the relationship between building and body. I can't get into it in detail. But one of the pleasures of being at the Gandhi Ashram was that I got to restore Gandhiji's cycle. And I have a hobby of motorcycle restoration, so the director allowed me to restore this. This could not have happened anywhere in the world. So a Dutch friend of mine came home one day, said, "What's this old rusty cycle doing in your house?" So I actually got to take Gandhi cycle home for about a year. And I worked on it in the study. And I told him, "That's Gandhiji cycle." So he just died. He just like, "What did you say?" And he said, like, "How can it be just here? You could just take it." I said, "I could." So he said, "Why don't you just buy a hero and give it back to the ashram and say you restored it?" Anyway, they just can't understand the way that things happen. So we restored this cycle, and it's incredible. Notice this. Look at that pedal. And there's an incredible story which I have to share to end this. Is that these cycles were made by a company called Freedom Cycles in Rajkot. And this was actually given to Gandhi, was given to the ashram in Rajkot, and Gandhiji brought it to Ahmedabad. Freedom Cycles didn't construct the full cycle. They packaged it the way Firefox does it and sent it to your village in a box. And you can see the weld marks on the frame. So you got, let's say, this is the neck piece, you got these tubes, and all you had to do was take it to your village workshop and get that welded. So basically what they did was they just distributed labor. And there was, these companies, I don't know if you know, you've heard of Wagh Bakri tea? That was instituted by Gandhiji. Okay, he was part of the reason that company started. Freedom Cycles was because Gandhi had an idea of how cycles should be manufactured in this country for the people who need to use it and for whom it empowers. So it wasn't that you bloody construct and manufacture the entire cycle in your factory. No, you send it to the village, let the village guy and the village workshop have its income from putting the cycle together. Look at the way that income is distributed in that conception. I'll end with this wonderful photograph. But, you know, Gandhiji was the first person in modern India to conceive of a design competition. In 1928, he instituted the first international design competition for the design of a laptop charkha, small one that you could use while you're traveling. Just look at the vision of the man. He's already knowing, he already recognizes that movement is important, that you will work on the move. he institutes an international competition for which there are 220 entries. Let's put this in perspective. For the CEPT Faculty of Technology, only 36 people applied. Okay, 220 people applied with, you had to make a 1:1 working model as a submission. It was won by a Czech designer, and these are all, you probably don't know, there's an exhibition, permanent exhibition at Magan Sangrahalaya in Varda, where you can see each of these. The interesting thing would be, can you guess what the prize money in 1928 was? It was 1 lakh rupees. Okay, about 10 million today. Okay, but being the government of India, they only paid the winner in 1958. I'll end on that note of optimism. Thank you very much.
Suggestions.
Very, very interesting presentation. After long, I guess I'm tempted to sit in the auditorium after 1 o'clock. A question is that incremental that we are talking about, right from the first project to the last project. The first project talks about incremental in a vertical sense because it progresses, and the last project kind of a thing, when I see it overall, it's a timeline from first to last. Now when I talk about timeline, it means that the kind of a density of material, density of column, and density of spaces.
Material, density of
column, and the density of spaces from the first project. Slowly kind of I don't call it dismantle, but they vanishes, and kind of that also is incremental in that sense. Reason could be the first project is craft based, and last project maybe whatever you showed is more of production of material based. So are you also kind of aware of this process that is emerging?
Well, honestly speaking, it's not that linear. There's much more fluctuation on the way. I have selected a reasonably consistent set of projects, not all. I think there is some notion of it, in the sense I am conscious of it. I was discussing that, and when I say that is, what are the processes you put in place in order to do a particular type of work. And if I'm understanding your comment, I'm very conscious about the relationship between previous project, present project, and some kind of general, not development, but relationship between what one is trying to explore. I don't know if that answers
All right,
but no, I'd like to engage with that a little bit more. But I think
do you know where this question comes from?
No.
This is a question you asked me in 1999.
Oh shit. It is one of those days, no? The laptop crashed, I was late. Now 1999's come back.
So yes, thanks for that wonderful kind of presentation. I think it's very rarely that we see kind of architects talk so kind of candidly and honestly about kind of their journey, and I think it's been wonderful for you to actually have shared that with us. One thing which kind of struck me that especially for a lot of us who had this kind of modernist, very hardcore modernist education, you especially at CEPT, with kind of the gamut of people you all have kind of experienced, I think it's probably more difficult to shed that, and I see a kind of open-mindedness in you which has allowed you to actually, maybe drop those slowly, but also maybe reimagine them in some way? Because I do feel that at its core it's still there, some of these kind of values still remain, but they've been kind of opened up, to kind of more readings, if you want to call it, or more interpretations. So I think it's very important for students to kind of take away this from that to kind of have a certain open-mindedness, not become so dogmatic about things we learned or we've been taught, necessarily as being kind of the right or the wrong way to do things, And just to kind of tie back, you kind of ended with your research, which and one thing you didn't talk about is teaching, which you've been doing for a long time. I mean, how have those two actually influenced the work, and has it anything to do with the open-mindedness which you kind of have?
I told them also yesterday that the kind of questions you get in the classroom, if you're going to answer them honestly, they require you to go into some kind of circuit of introspection. And I would say that the teaching has been fundamental in this process, and it's an important point. I've received it many times that there's not much of the teaching in the presentation. The point, it is actually got not to do with the fact that I don't recognize it, but the fact that I never documented anything that I did when I taught. And largely these are all photographs pulled off on the way. So it's really documentation. The research part has that documentation, but there's been no documentation of what the studios did, etc., etc. So yes, the relationship with teaching is fundamental. And for me, I also needed in that period that I ran the workshop to disconnect. It also is the time that I disconnected from teaching. So it was a very important point a time to realize that for me the academics is a very important arena in which to kind of consolidate the thinking and so on, however scattered it is. And in fact, because it's scattered and it's now, I think, beginning to get some kind of outline. But for a long time, I was very insecure about all the guys who taught us, and even many of the way that architects present themselves is so coherent. I don't see the pattern yet, but the pattern is emerging. I feel it now. So that's one part of it. But I think I don't know open-mindedness or not. It's just that something happened. There's a particular incident that took place about the time I graduated. It was very interesting because in some sense there was an outsider at CEPT in the form of Karthikeya Sarabhai. And he was at a concert on Indian classical music. And somebody asked the musician about parampara and tradition and the guru-shishya relationship and so on and so forth. And there's this very interesting discussion which Karthikeya ended by giving an example. He said, everybody feels that when my son says hi every morning, hi dad, and doesn't touch my feet, that the world is falling apart. So he said, I don't look at it like that. I don't look at it that that saying hi dad is a problem. He said that if you look at it carefully, you have to make the distinction between whether the language is changing or whether the value is changing. And he said, the value that you want to encode in touching someone's feet is respect. And the question is whether you are conserving the value or you want to conserve the language by which that value is expressed. To me, that just changed everything. What I learned from Rajay or Doshi or Varki or whoever had something to do with language. But when I think about it, neither Rajay nor Doshi nor Chaya ever talked about language. It was more a pure system of assimilation that had come down through CEPT. But the point is not CEPT. The point is actually this being able to distinguish language from value. And I see very strongly in my plans, or in the designs that we make at Anthill with Roma as well, that what we value about architecture hasn't changed very much. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to detail it well, we want light, we want material. Yeah, it's in an idiom that I was not at all familiar with. Now I'm more excited about a new idiom coming up. I would love to do a brick and concrete building actually, because we haven't done one. So, I mean, it's just that way. It's not, I don't know, yes, openness, not open, I'm not sure. But yeah. So yes, teaching fundamental to all of this. And I think one of the reasons for that is because it allows you to question. I mean, if I had to run a practice that was purely a business, I would not have been able to I would not have been able to survive in terms of the intellectual part of it. I don't mean in terms of monetary terms. We were discussing yesterday in the studio that about 4 years ago we actually reached a level where the office was completely mechanical, not 4 or 5 years ago, mechanical. And at that time Kashi, you know Kashi from CEPT, was also working in the office, and Roma and I sat down and we said, like, this is just crap that's coming out of the office, honestly. And what is the reason for this? And what we realized, and I shared with these guys, was that the organization of the office, nobody taught us how to organize an office. You do it by the offices you work for. And so you just learned it on the way in some haphazard way. And when I talk to people like the CEO of the company we work for, they're astounded that we even survive, that business where an architect office even survives. They're shocked with the level of knowledge that we have of business. And this was before that, and we realized that our processes were actually what were the impediment in what we wanted to do. We wanted to be a creative office, but we are putting hierarchical processes in place which actually make us into an efficiency-based office. And efficiency and creativity are two completely different purposes. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but if your purpose is to be a creative office, then you can't organize yourself as an efficient office and expect to एक दो बार तुक्का लग जाएगा कि in an efficient system you'll do something neat, new, clean, whatever. But it doesn't become a system. And it made us ask some very hard questions, because if you're not going to have that level of efficiency, when somebody walks into your office, they will know this office can't do an airport. They will know by the way you're organized, right? So you have to be able to mentally say that I'm not going to be that architect. If I do, then it's going to be in another avatar. But at this point in time, to be clear that this is the area of, how would you say, this is the arena in which I'm going to play. I can't play football on a cricket field. It can't happen. So I think that clarity and that piece is something very, very important. And then to design the practice, look at, I mean, even what I asked in 1999, that question about whether you're looking at your practice as something that is a fait accompli, or you're looking at something that itself is in the process and can be shaped. And I think for me, without teaching wouldn't have happened. That question wouldn't have arisen, because teaching gives you the space, it gives you the intensity of academic questioning to ask, like, what the hell am I doing? And I think that's very important for a practice of the nature that ours is.
Hello. Okay, yeah. Thank you for an incredible presentation. Like, I really loved it. So my question for you is, like, what I gathered from it is that your idea of incremental working comes from your various projects and how you've kind of grown to it proceeding in a certain manner over a longer period of time, or maybe it's because of the craftsmanship. So my question to you...
Because of the transmission?
Craftsmanship. Craftsmanship, yes. So my question to you is, how do you compare the craftsmanship and mass production in the same light as value to language? Because I see a lot of new practices now wherein the architect is constantly working on how the craftsmanship is going to transform the entire idea of the project. And how much time do you actually commit to the project then, as opposed to it turning out in a certain way that you would like it to be?
No, you're going to have to be a little more.
Okay,
So one is there's the relationship between craftsmanship and machine production or mass production. That's one question you're asking. I think there are many questions in that one question, but I'm not making a value judgment. As an architect, I'm not taking a political stand. I'm simply saying that for certain projects, certain types of production systems are necessary. And for other types of projects, other types of production systems are necessary. If I was doing a pharmaceutical factory and I wanted to do craft, it would be ridiculous. Or for that matter, an airport. So I think that the appropriateness of the system that you choose to plug into is important. And I've shown you the ones which are related to incrementality, because that's the theme today. I thought we'd see our work through. And it's interesting for me that certain projects don't fall into that theme, which I haven't shown you. But my idea today was not to give you a comprehensive idea of what we've done. It's not a catalog. But the point being that I'm not sure that I want to make a value judgment about it as an architect. I'm happy to work with mass-produced systems. I do have some reservations of when the entire design process becomes about assembling vendor-driven components. And then I begin to wonder where I come into the picture. And that's an important question for me as an architect, what am I doing? Am I simply putting bits and pieces that are already made? And this is where I said that the ethics of that crafts project in Udaipur comes in, because that's exactly what I'm doing, but with 600-year-old pieces. So on one hand, I'm ready to engage with that craft and existent component, but for some reason I have a little bit of hesitation when I have to use like a Italian kitchen and just plug it into my design. I have a hesitation, I'm not saying I don't do it, but I'm not able to yet put my finger on why that's a problem for me, if you understand what I'm saying. So, I'm just putting it out there that I think partly it's got to do with half-baked notions that I have that all production is happening in Italy and therefore nobody in India is getting labor or remuneration. But I don't know the picture, it's just some half-baked idea that I have. So could well be that I'm misinformed about the way that certain systems work because I'm engaged more with other systems. So I do think that at the end of the day, if you're going to get involved with the particular system, you have to do some research about it. I mean that I think is abundantly clear in the way that we work. That whatever we get into, we study it, good, bad, ugly, we study it to see how to engage with it in the most meaningful way that is acceptable to us, the client, the site, etc., etc.
Hi. So my question, I actually really found your idea of the line and the corners quite interesting. So I was thinking of, especially in terms of say planned cities, the cities are planned by the logic of the line, usually. Say for example, even if in the case of Chandigarh, but the people somehow appropriate the space in their own way. Probably because the people or the agencies that produce the space of a city come from the logic of the corners, even though the master plan is on the logic of lines. But then how do you look at this this logic of those corners in a context of say a metropolis where the space is produced by factors which are more global and which are not produced, where the space is not produced by the people who come from say a logic of the corners, or agencies or say big corporations which are producing the space of the city of a metropolis. How do you find that logic working in say in the case of the smart city plan or Amravati? So how do you think that works in this context?
So I think that you can't apply the same logic at every scale. Otherwise you're making the same mistake that Erdogan made. Okay, the house is not a city. Okay, though he said it was. So the point is that at what point, let's say that if you're looking at the corner as something that proliferates and something that fractally grows, let's take a natural system, an organism that grows in the same kind of order, like let's say barnacles or a coral reef. A coral reef can't grow endlessly. It cannot. Every biological system, if you're using that analogy, will have a certain limit of growth. its own internal structure can only support a certain scale. Okay, so I mean we've had this kind of example of the elephant. Okay, you have an elephant that grows, okay, to twice its size or 3 times its size. It is going to burn from inside. It's not simply that you can do a Gulliver Travels, and because the surface area of the elephant is increasing by the cube, or the volume is increasing by a cube, the power of the cube, and the surface area is only increasing by a square. So finally there is going to be not enough surface area to dissipate the heat of the elephant, so the elephant will die. Now what I'm saying is therefore there's a relationship between surface, volume, these physical quantities in any organism, whether you look at a city or whatever it is. And therefore when an organism grows to a particular critical scale, 2 things can happen. A, it can fragment and become many cities. B, it can change its order of organization. So I can put in a metro system, or I can put in something which changes the scale of operation. So at that point of time, you can't look at a corner. Okay, you can't talk about corners at the scale of the metro, or the scale of BRTS, or the scale of an airport. You can't, and that's the folly we are making. That we want everything to be either formal or everything to be either informal. And therefore we are not looking at the relationship of what is the relationship between formal and informal, or what is the relationship between this order that grows and this order that remains static and holds. Okay, now somehow traditional medieval cities had a sense of this. Okay, you put the Jama Masjid there in Ahmedabad, and you can't see it when you're at Teen Darwaza. It's just taken over by shops. But you go into the Jama Masjid, and the way the courtyard opens up is the scale that you want. But it's not that the big is not there. Everything cannot be corners. So I mean, I'm just saying that in your question, my sense is that at the scale of the metropolis, when you become a city that big, you're not a medieval city anymore. Right? Actually, there's a drawing I have that we made for one of the exhibition, where I've taken Dhalgar Road, which is that small. I've then taken CG Road, which is that big. And these are market streets in Ahmedabad. And then I've taken Sarkhej Gandhinagar Highway, if you all are from, which is that big, in scale, from that small to that big. Now the thing is that the scale of operation of Sarkhej Gandhinagar Highway is absolutely essential to Ahmedabad today. We are not talking about Ahmedabad in 1526. And therefore it's important to understand the logic of the relationship between big and small. The corner works at a particular scale. You can't make a corner at for 500 people. It doesn't work. The corner works at that intimate scale of you and me giving ourselves a big bear hug. It doesn't work like 500 guys giving a bear, then it becomes like Modi's yoga. So, I mean, the thing is, you've got to realize that there's a relationship, there's a critical relationship, and that critical relationship has an appropriate scale. It cannot just be taken at any scale. So, Metropolis has its order. We have to recognize that, and perhaps the corner plays a smaller role in that order. One has to accept. It's very romantic, that corner is very romantic. So, one has to be aware of it. But the fact that you can't have a city which doesn't have a place for that livability or that sense of spontaneity that the corner has allows people. Because if everything lives by the line, then it's going to be a either very ordered city, okay, and therefore life will not spill out, or it's just going to die.
Any more questions? Thank you for your presentation.